Hello. Hello. Long time no
Hello. Do you
see.
want? Yeah. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Who am I and where have I been? Hi, I'm
Yeah.
Karl. I'm new here.
Hello, Carl. Okay, this is
Good to see you,
starting to
mate.
sound
Good to see
weird.
you.
Yeah. Good to see you. It's been a while.
Yeah, it's been a minute, right?
Yeah.
Between traveling for work and then never ending recurring sickness with kids, and yeah, it's all good fun.
Yeah. No, that's fine. We missed you. And with
Yeah,
we, I mean Richard. But now Richard's not here.
yeah. And Richard's what off on a cruise with his uh, duff back, right?
Yeah. 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 He's got some back pains. Hopefully, it'll be sorted before he goes on the cruise. But yeah, well deserved holiday, I'd say.
Yeah.
All right, mate. So how's your week been?
It's been okay. Actually, busy. Um, Neck deep in a lot of Terraform at the minute to do automating some application infrastructure deployment for a vendor.
The question is, did we just lose Carl? I think we just lost Carl. Maybe it's the energy again. Yeah, no, he'll probably be back very, very soon. Um, yeah. So, well, we're gonna wait a little bit for Carl to come back so we can talk about his Terraform journey the past week. We're obviously gonna ask him, did he use OpenTofu or actually use Terraform? Uh, as for my week, it's been a lot of meetings, just a lot of meetings. I've been working on some Kubernetes stuff and been working on the demo we're going to be using today. I'm going to do a little Kubevirt. I have to say that I did found it a bit odd to well to run virtual machines on Kubernetes, but there's definitely a use case for that. So from a technical perspective, that's been my week, and obviously because Richard is having a holiday, I had to take over some stuff. So lots of meetings with Richard to transfer some stuff over. Uh, yeah, that's been my week, and we'll get back to Carl's week when he comes back, when he figures out what's broken, whether that's a power outage or someone pressed the wrong button on the router. Um, he's just texting me he'll be back in a minute. So while we wait for that, we're just gonna quickly jump to the news, and then we'll get back to Carl when he comes back. Okay, so there's not been a lot of news in the past couple of weeks when it comes to cloud native. Obviously, there's always going to be a couple of good blog posts. What we do want to share is that the call for proposals for KubeCon in Paris 2024 is still open. So if you want to deliver your most epic session, do sign up, do check out the link, and see if you can start with a session. And something else just happened in the past couple of days. There was a tweet a couple of weeks ago by one of the developers of Curl, CURL, um, that there was going to be an update rather sooner than later and outside of their normal update schedule because of a CVE that has been discovered. Yesterday morning, Dutch time, I'd say morning in Dutch time, probably. Yeah. Yesterday morning, the details of that CVE were released as well as a new version of curl. And that CVE is specific to using a SOX 5 proxy connections within libcurl or curl. And it's a heap overflow. It's a high severity CVE. Obviously, there are a lot of preconditions you need to meet before you meet all the well before it can actually be exploited. But if you are using SOX 5 and libcurl and curl itself, then it's time to start updating. Top of my head, version 7 is vulnerable. If you're using something before version 7, you should be good. But in the end, it's always best to just upgrade to the latest version. What we're currently seeing, and And why are we talking about a curl CV? Is that necessarily cloud native? Well, we do a lot of Kubernetes, and we've got a lot of ingress controllers. We run Linux containers, and it could be the same on Windows containers. But curl, and specifically libcurl, is something is being used a lot. For example, if you're doing an Nginx ingress controller and you're doing mod security, that depends on libcurl. Doesn't mean that they all meet those preconditions, but it is something that take to account. I'm seeing a lot of images and base images being updated currently. So if you're running anything that's doing libcurl or curl, do update to the latest version. And I see that Karl is back.
I don't want to talk about it.
Or was it?
It's the same thing it always is. Because I'm too lazy to go and check the stupid meter outside because I shouldn't have to. You know what I mean? Do you know what I need to do? I just need to buy my own house, and then I don't have to have those stupid things. You know what I mean? I need to stop renting houses, and I need to, just go and buy a house so I can not have those stupid meters that do this every single Thursday at 3 minutes past 12. You
Why
think
is
I
it
would
every
know better
Thursday,
at this
though?
stage? Because
You just put in enough for a week.
We put it usually we put in like a monthly when I get paid and whatever. Not that the whole world needs to know how I do this, but anyway, you put it in monthly, and then it just happens to run out every now and again on a Thursday afternoon. Yeah, right in the middle of this. So
I was
anyway,
you dropped out. I was just saying it could be one of two things: someone pressed a button on the router,
or the usual thing that it is. So I just need to buy. I just need to buy a house. No, I just need to buy a house. That's it. Automate it. Yeah, you would think so, wouldn't you? But no. I mean, this is how backwards the technology is. So you can use an app on your phone to purchase the top up like you used to do with the pay-as-you-go phones, right? But at least that was smart enough just to update your account automatically. No, we get like a 20-digit code. You have to go outside to the keypad and plug it in. It's so backwards.
But it's done. All right, you were talking about your week, and then
yes. So what a great show so far. Thanks everybody for watching.
We just quickly skipped on to the news, but I said, well, when you're back,
sure. So I've been doing the last week and a bit. I've been fairly heavy into Terraform. So the client that I work with has a third-party vendor who previously hosted APIs for them that they just hit, but the client wants to host those APIs themselves now, still based on the third-party vendor software and application stack. So what I've been doing is building up the application infrastructure. So that's everything from virtual networks to API management function apps with some container apps, actually in container app environment. So it's pretty interesting, pretty cool. Be good to see their application working inside our client's Azure landing zone. So that's pretty much been the focus of my week, or my last couple of weeks actually. So
any sign of OpenTofu being brought into there as opposed to Terraform?
No.
We talked about it last week about OpenTofu.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, it'll start to deviate, obviously, right? And they'll start to be this. I mean, right now they're probably fairly close to each other because the change and the deviation happened relatively recently. But right now for the work that we're doing for this client, I think that Terraform is Terraform's probably where they're going to stay because that's where their skill sets are and that's what they trust. I think as a wider service provider in the wider Avanade community and the wider tech community in general, it's probably something we're going to have to support and we're going to have to know about because we have to know about Bicep and we have to know about ARM. We have to know about Terraform. So, I mean, OpenTofu is just another thing we're probably going to have to know about because some customers might make that choice to run with OpenTofu. And to be honest, it feels silly saying that name. I wish they'd picked something different. But yeah,
Yeah, I think
Tofu or Open Terraform or whatever it is. But yeah, I haven't really looked very closely at it to see how it's deviating. It'll not be deviating an awful lot at this point, but I
it
suspect that
will
it will
happen at
start
some
to.
point.
There are two different development teams and two different,
Yeah,
two different communities that are contributing to it. So it's going to change, which
might
is going to
even
make
end up
things
in a
awkward.
different vision of
Yeah, and the
but
fact that
it's
it's now inside what the Linux Foundation
yeah, it's being
is
backed by the
interesting.
Linux Foundation, correct?
Yeah, it's interesting as well because I don't know. I was reading a lot, and we talked in previous episodes on the show about how the OpenTF, as it was then, and what became OpenTofu,
Mm-hmm.
was being backed by the folks that were that were competing or building commercial products on top of what Terraform were producing, and in effect, were ended up competing with HashiCorp's offerings. But
Mm-hmm.
listen, we'll see what happens. I mean, I don't think
We'll see.
Terraform is going anywhere. And someone on Twitter or X recently had said, "What happens if HashiCorp change their mind and go back to MPL licensing? So what
Yeah.
happens to OpenTofu then? OpenTofu then? You know?
I think it's all about the timing. I mean, right now, obviously, Terraform itself has the biggest user base out there,
Yeah.
as opposed to OpenTofu. Um, I think we just have to track the development. But if they would go back to an MPL license now, I'd guess that Terraform will remain the
Yeah.
biggest for time to come. I think it's just interesting to follow development, see if there's going to be a deviation. Um, for the worse,
I
for the
do
good, we don't know.
I do like Terraform as a DSL or an infrastructure as code language, and by extension, what OpenTofu is currently doing, I like. But
Mm-hmm.
given that I mean, an Azure fan, I mean, other clouds exist. We're cloud agnostic on this show, but other clouds do exist. But there's no hiding the fact that we're generally Azure fans, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think I still prefer to probably write a lot of this infrastructure as code in Bicep over Terraform. Although Terraform is very good and it's a lot more mature than Bicep,
Mm-hmm.
but Bicep has that plug in directly to what you're trying to do in Azure because it's just an abstraction on top of the ARM templates and the APIs, right?
Well, that's the interesting part with the infrastructure as code on Azure as opposed to Terraform, right? And there's things like a state and it was always a fire and forget thing because you
Yep.
deployed it and there was no connection between source and what has been deployed.
Yep.
But now on Azure with things like deployment stacks, that becomes very, very interesting. I'm just looking forward to see how this develops.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no opinion on no
No.
showdown, right? No
Yeah,
showdown
no.
just yet.
I think they all have their benefits, and given the choice, I would probably write my infrastructure code in Bicep. But realistically, there's not an awful lot of difference between them.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
No.
I only started to pick up Terraform when I joined Avanade in November last year, so almost a year ago. And the only reason I was able to pick it up so quickly was because I knew Bicep
Yeah.
really well. So
Well, that's the thing. By the language looks similar.
skills are transferable, right?
Yeah. All right. We got one little piece of news left, which is the private preview
Yeah.
of regional disaster recovery by Azure Backup for AKS.
So this is for all. I mean, we've talked about it, right? This is for all you stateless containers or stateless applications on Kubernetes fans, right? Using Azure Backup to using Azure Backup to protect your data. Um, I may get shouted at as an MVP for saying this, but feels like Azure are a little bit late to the party here for this sort of thing because Kaysen, I'm sure if Michael Cade's watching later, he'll correct me on my pronunciation Kaysen, but K10 from Kaysen and the folks at Veeam, have been offering this sort of stuff for a bit,
Long time.
But I mean, it's good to see an Azure native, um,
Yeah.
not cloud
Oh, no,
native, Azure
definitely.
native offering, So look forward to
Yeah.
getting a play with that, and that's really good for we've talked in recent weeks and months about um, running databases inside your cluster as opposed to running them in PaaS, and this is if you're going to do that, then you need a backup product or you need something to back that data up,
Yes.
and this is it. Or
I think that's
K10
exactly the
from
use
Kaysen.
case. Yeah.
Yep.
All right. We're already 16 minutes in, so it's time we're gonna take a look at our favorite subject of today, 10-minute tech. See, and this is when Richard's not here because he has the clickety click magic skills to put on
Oh, yep. Sorry, that's
the
me
thing on
this
the
week.
screen.
There,
No,
there we go.
I don't know if it was you or me, but he always times it perfectly within that millisecond for some reason. I think he's just waiting for that, like when we're doing it. When we're doing it, today, Kubevirt,
Yeah.
Kubevirt.io, been around for a little bit. Um, yeah.
What is it?
So it's a way to run virtual machines on your Kubernetes cluster.
Hang on. Why?
For hard to migrate workloads, let's say you already have a bunch of workloads running in containers, but you've got those couple of VM instances that you also want to run on Kubernetes because that's your platform of choice, or
Mhm.
let's say 90% of your stuff is already running in Kubernetes. Hey, why not add a VM to that? I mean, there's use cases for that. I think it's good that it's possible.
Yeah.
For me personally, when installing this on my cluster, I felt I had to apologize to my cluster for some reason. But no, it was actually quite some fun. It's very, very elaborate. You can do a lot of things with it. There are just some, that it almost brought me back to my VMware ESX days, or even before that. It's just kind of like, oh, we've got. I was almost looking at Kubernetes as my hypervisor, and then see
Yeah.
where it
Well,
brings
I
me.
mean,
But yeah,
who is it that says it? It's Michael Levan, right? He's on some of his podcasts. He says repeatedly that Kubernetes is a data center. So if Kubernetes is a data center because it's got your networking, it's got your storage, it's got your containers and your pods, which are effectively your servers and all of that sort of stuff, right? So if it's a data center, why can't you run your VMs in it? Yeah, I have similar feelings about running VMs inside of Kubernetes. I mean, for the last several years, we're focusing on getting away from VM workloads and trying to adopt the microservice decoupled sort of architecture approach.
yeah,
But I can see the use case, like you said, for hard to migrate workloads. Can you? I mean, we'll get into this obviously as you're going through here, but I mean, it's maybe useful for VMs then to share the same sort of life cycle, um, sort of set up
yes.
as your application pods, right?
Yeah, yeah, no, you can definitely go that route. I think that's exactly where the use case is coming into play. Um, well, you can go to kubevirt.io, and they're marketing it as building a virtualization API for Kubernetes. I mean, that's kind of the kind of like VMware, right? It's like we had ESX. It's just virtualization on top of virtualization, and we can now run VMs in Kubernetes. Um,
It's
yeah,
just like I mean,
kubevirt.io.
like the title suggests, it's just all sorts of levels of inception going on here.
Yeah,
You know,
it's
virtual
VMception.
scale sets running your
Yeah.
running your Kubernetes cluster, and then nested virtualization all of inside that running virtual machines. So yeah,
Yeah, and I prepared a little demo. I mean, you can go above and beyond, and you can spend hours doing this. And if you want to do this well, definitely make sure you have like actual VM knowledge, or that you need that kind of. I was gonna say traditional knowledge. That's not the right word. You need you need to have that infrastructure knowledge from back in
Mm.
the day. That definitely helps, and we'll see
Like,
why in a little bit. It's
awesome. I'll be
yeah.
quiet now.
Oh no, you can talk all you want, mate. You can talk all you want. Um, so I'm just gonna show what I did, and then we'll open up the command line and then connect to a machine, because it doesn't really make sense to install it all on screen. We probably don't even have enough time for that. Um, Deploying Kubevirt does require you to deploy the operator and the custom resource definitions, the CRDs. Basically, copy pasting the whole thing. Copy paste it into. I've done it on AKS. That was something I really had to read up on, because a lot of the examples are based on Fedora and OpenShift, and lots of examples for
Wee
that.
bit of tweaking required for AKS's flavor of Kubernetes. Yeah.
Not at all. No, I did
Oh,
not
okay.
have to do any tweaking. That I think the tweaking comes when you actually start uploading your ISO files and your images, and you need a good storage behind that. Um, last week we talked about some new storage features in Kubernetes. They might definitely come into play when having ISOs stored in your Kubernetes cluster, so that new type of storage, or the Azure Container Storage, can definitely help there. But configuring this was basically copy pasting, and that was fairly simple. Additionally, what you need is and you see that with a lot of CNCF projects and with a lot of open source projects that run on Kubernetes, everyone has their own command line. So you can install virtctl. You kind of need it, so you need virtctl to do some things. Again, copy paste, next finish. Very, very easy to do. Now, before we actually look at what's running, what's important is, and you just mentioned the concept of stateless when we talked about backup. I mean, there's going to be a state somewhere, right? If you have a virtual machine, you have a disk attached to a virtual machine. Now you have a Kubernetes cluster, you have nodes, and those nodes have disks, but they are not the disks for those virtual machines, right? You need to store the disk somewhere, like back in the day with Hyper-V, the VHD files. You need to store them somewhere. And then when you start your virtual machine on Kubernetes, where is it going to grab the disk from? It can do that from a repository, which we did in the demo, but you can also upload your own disk, and that's what you do with. There's a nice article on it, or a nice example. Experiment with the containerized data importer, which is basically a very, very fast and quick way to introduce the data volumes. It says it all here. I'm not going to read it out loud, but it's a way for you to upload your ISO files to your Kubernetes cluster, and it leverages
Awesome.
the PVC to store the ISO somewhere, so that you can then reference it when you're going to start your virtual machine. Now, what I've done is there's a good, and I like this, because you said, did you have to do any tweaking? No, there's different examples, whether you want to do a Minikube, Kind, if you've got Kind cluster running locally, or for cloud providers, the most generic one. This one works out of the box. Just
Awesome.
that. It's just copy pasting, next finish. So you install the Kubevirt thing, and then what you want to do is use Kubevirt, another nice lab for it. I really like this kind of documentation. That it's not an endless page of stuff. It's just a couple of steps, like very, very scoped to what you're going to do.
Just enough to get you going.
Yeah, I like that. It's just there's always links to you want to do other stuff. For the VMware and Hyper-V people back in the day, you can see it here, live migration. They even brought features like that into Kubernetes, so that's pretty cool. So to deploy a virtual machine, you Kubevirt, you just grab the YAML. We can quickly look at the YAML that I have used, because this is that's the wrong link. That was what we just looked at. Sometimes that happens with the copy pasting, right?
Yeah, I just
there we
thought
go.
it was me. I just thought it was me
No,
because it happens to me all the time.
this is when you start smashing Control C and then do C a lot of times because sometimes it just
People
doesn't register.
people ask me why I hit Control C about 5 times every time, and that's the
This is
reason
why.
why.
This is why. So here you can see it, and this is when virtual machines meet Kubernetes. API version, Kubevirt.io. Obviously, we installed all of that. Kind virtual machine. Now, this is when it kind of feels like you have to apologize to your cluster, but I don't necessarily have a use case for it in my line of work or in my day-to-day activities.
Mm.
I was very skeptic about this. I mean, VMs in general, when someone talks about VMs, I make jokes about being legacy and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But I find this pretty cool.
Yeah, I can see use cases for, if you're running your Kubernetes cluster and you're running your VMs, especially if you're running it in the cloud, you're going to encounter some latency. There's a couple of milliseconds of latency with some of the stuff you're on the cloud, especially if you're spread out across multiple availability zones and multiple regions and stuff, perhaps. But I can see the use case for this, even in the on-premises world, where you need super low latency between
Yep.
a legacy application sitting on a virtual machine in this scenario and your microservice pods or applications. So I can see use cases for super low latency networking in this regard.
Yeah. No, I think that's exactly the use case, and but I just find it pretty cool that you can do this. Yeah, no, it's I don't do it every day. I don't really work with VMs a lot, so I'd probably not use it very often. I think the use case is very significant to very big companies that have a lot of workloads. But then, like I said, it is very cool that you can do this. So you can see that there are some differences as how we normally deploy pods and servers and all that stuff. You can see that the specification a little bit different in the kind virtual machine for this API version. Because we have to reference a disk, right? We have a container disk, we have a cloud init disk, like that. So, for example, what you would use this for, the cloud init, and there's a lot of technologies that you can, you have lots of documentation on the initialization of a virtual machine. But you're talking about stuff like copying in the SSH keys and that kind of stuff, so you can actually connect to the machine, or for Windows it might be something different. So you have your devices, and then you have your memory, and more or less the same as if you would deploy a pod. That's what I've deployed. And then if we open up the command line, and we're just going to do kubectl get pods, you can see that I've got some test VM, test VMI. So there's some pods running, but kubectl get VMs. I've got a VM running, and I can, it's just I've got a VM kubectl get VMs. Like that's you doing what now? Yeah, so we can kubectl describe test VM. Oh, describe VM. Sorry, describe VM, not pod. Describe VM, and we can see stuff that's running here. I don't have any external storage connected to it. This is just the demo VM that's running, so can't do the snapshots and all that stuff. But you can see this is the YAML that's been deployed. So back to what I said about those initialization disks or files, what you would prep something like configuration file and use that to deploy or create the VM instead of pulling an image. But that also contains things like devices, CD-ROM, all that stuff. That's the kind of thing you can actually configure. Obviously, it won't have, you won't have a CD-ROM. There's not, when you use, there's not going to be somewhere in that Azure data center or
you're not
whatever.
Mapping hardware to your
you're not going to. Exactly. You're not going to type eject and then somewhere in the data center something pops open. That's not always going to happen, obviously. But sometimes we know with VMs, especially if you're migrating them, even between VMware Hyper-V stuff that you need to make sure that those disks and devices are still present in the configuration for everything to work correctly.
Yeah. Do you know what?
That's
Do
the
you know
kind of
what
thing we can
was the
maintain.
thing that caught me out most often was when you're live migrating VMs and you had an ISO mounted in the
Oh yeah.
virtual disk drive, and yeah,
Mm-hmm.
that wasn't fun. But
No,
none of that here.
no, no. And you can see that my VM is actually live migratable. I mean, who can say that about his or her VM, right? It's live migratable. But right now I'm just doing get VMs. But it's still a pod, right? So how do we know it's actually a virtual machine? I was playing with some Windows stuff as well, but that's a lot of work to get up and running properly. Even though you can do it, but that requires all the extra storage and the ISO stuff mounted. So I just pull the public image, in this case an Ubuntu one. But what we can do is I've got it here. Let me see. There we go. I can connect it with CNC, but first we have a console. I mean, we can connect to the console of our test VM, as in if you were in the data center and open up and put in the cable. So I can do this, and so I pull this image, from the internet based on the Kubevirt documentation. Luckily, it's telling me which user and password I can use, because it's a demo image. So this is not normally the case. Normally, it would use like an init script to configure the SSH keys for you. So what I can actually
Right.
do is zeros and then do go cups go. I'm connected to my virtual machine. Now you could still say, well, that still looks a lot like a pod, and you're quite right. We can do something else, and it's been a long time since I used this tool, but you can see it in my taskbar probably. I'm gonna have to do this. I had it somewhere here. This one. Oh, kind of like port forwarding. I removed the banner so you can't put it in. I can do virtctl VNC proxy only test VM. Is what's going to give me back is a port number. So I should be able to connect to localhost right now. I'm just changing the properties here so I've got the right port, and I'll put it on the screen because the port number is 415. Okay, double click, and you can see that it's accepting a connection. I'm connected. No, well, this is the console. I'm connected to the console with VNC. How do we know? Let's send a control delete, which in Linux means I'm going to start rebooting. This is my virtual machine booting with. I find this very cool.
This is awesome.
And then this is just console access. So the same would happen with a Windows virtual machine. And obviously what we can do, and if I just log in here, go cups go, still connected. It works. So we're actually connected to the console of our virtual machine. Obviously, if you're doing production workloads, you can still configure the service, and you already have the metadata in the YAML, so you can do the load balancing for multiple virtual machines. Even configure an ingress to connect to it for whatever you're doing. Maybe you're running a website on it. You can do it. I think that's pretty awesome.
It feels weird, but it is very cool.
It feels very weird. It feels like what am I? I'm in a virtual machine connected to the console that's running on Kubernetes, which means this is essentially running in a couple of pods, which is running on virtual machines because the nodes are virtual machines, which is running in a public cloud, which essentially is the next level of virtualization. Like, how many layers do we have here?
Lots.
A lot, but it's still pretty cool, right? There's you can go above and beyond. I really like this easy. I've not used VNC for years, but it's pretty cool, right? That's pretty cool. We just connected to the console of the thing, and we can, do the thing like back in the day. Control Alt Delete, and there we go. We'll start rebooting again. It's That's Kubevirt. We're already out
Yeah.
of time, I see, but I mean, I'm actually a little bit excited that you can do this. Just cool.
Yeah, it is. I mean, are you going to be doing it every day? Probably not, but it's good to know that if there was an awkward workload, if there was something that you couldn't get migrated off of a virtual machine for whatever reason, or there were super low latency requirements that that you're able to do this, and that you're not the only one doing it.
And that's it's good that you're saying, would you do this every day? Probably not. You have to have the use case, and then the technology is there for you, ready to use. That
Yep.
also, I just said, if you want to do, when you have to, play around with the CDIs, upload the images, have the ISOs ready, build your init scripts, your init disk to, do the preparation. So once everything is configured, copy in that SSH key, for example, or other stuff from wherever it needs to come from. That takes some work,
Yep.
but because we're not going to be doing this every day, that's fine. This is, I mean, if you're doing something like this, it will be a decision well thought through.
Yeah.
It should take a little while to get this configured well and good and ready for production. It's something you need to think about when you're doing this, and that's fine.
Yeah. And now I'm wondering when either of us will first use Kubevirt in anger or in production.
I don't know.
Be interesting.
I think to me personally, I'd see a bigger use case for my customer base anyway for Windows as opposed to Linux. I mean, if this is
Yeah. As
really
opposed to
my
Windows
personal opinion.
containers, right?
Yes, so creating a Windows container based on what you're already running on a Windows server can still be quite complex to get without code changes. Let's just say without code changes,
Uh-huh.
grabbing it and creating a Windows container that supports all the features that you need is more work than doing that for
I
Linux.
mean, I think I know the customer you're talking about for anybody that doesn't know. I
Yeah,
used to work with Wesley,
no,
but I assume that was quite a bit of work to get them from
it's
A to B effectively into Windows containers.
it was quite some debugging. We're
Yeah.
talking about certificates, end-to-end TLS, that kind of stuff.
Mhm.
That's just harder in Windows containers, which is okay. We're already happy that we're able to do it, and it's a very, very nice first step into containerization. I mean, it was a big win, and it's a nice
Hey.
stepping stone.
Yep.
But for Linux, I mean, in Linux, we're in Windows. Usually, the issue is, and I'll be quiet very soon because we're going way
It's all
over
good.
time. But on Windows, we see a lot of code bases or solutions depending on GUI libraries and that kind of stuff. So you need more stuff in the container. Um, and I think that would be, oh, just sat on a big boat.
Lucky
Welcome,
you.
Richard. Welcome. Um,
Uh,
yeah. So no, for the Windows container. Yeah, I see that use case being bigger because usually on Linux we're not depending on the GUI. We already
uh-huh.
have everything configured, so it's easier to containerize that. But
So,
yeah,
I mean, back then and still now. In fact, I'm about to have a similar conversation with my client in the next week about their journey to containerization from a lot of Windows hosted applications. And the fact that you could do Windows containers in the first place was a good stepping stone to get them into that cloud native world. And then your North Star or your target was, let's get this Linuxified, if I can coin a phrase. um and because that's the end goal. It's cheaper, it's slicker, it's whatever. But there was, what I didn't appreciate probably until talking to you now, was that there was still quite a big gap between Windows VM app service or whatever and Windows container. And so Kubevirt, if you get the Windows bit working, surely Kubevirt then adds another stepping stone before Windows container that you could still get them into that cloud native world,
Yeah.
but without as much heartache, maybe.
Probably a little less, but yeah, no, that's absolutely correct. And I do have to say that when I do Windows containers, it is on AKS, and I think what Microsoft has been doing in the past couple of years, really, the Windows containers on AKS, it really matured. I mean, we started off with a lot of, jumping through hoops to get stuff up and running, but right now it's pretty stable. It's got a lot of features. Yeah, I'm pretty fine with it actually. As opposed to a
Yeah.
couple of years ago, I'd say don't ever do it. Now I'm saying, well, if you need it, then why not?
And I'm really conscious that we're over time, but this is interesting stuff. Hopefully, our folks that are sticking with us in the rewatch or in the future don't mind us going over a little bit. But is Windows containers in AKS or Windows containers in general matured to a point where you'd be happy to leave a workload sitting on a Windows container, or are you still planning for a refactor or re-architect into Linux containers?
From a technical perspective, I mean, we've got a couple of customers, well, as you know, that have been running Windows containers for years now.
Yep.
From a technical perspective, I don't really mind. I'm say, well, if it's stable now. However, I'd also always say, see if you can refactor, rewrite your code to support Linux containers.
Because it's smaller,
Even
right?
Exactly, just for performance, speed,
Yep.
and costs. I mean,
attack surface as well.
Attack surface as well, but bigger images require more capacity. It's just more expensive.
Bigger node
if you can do it
pools.
on Linux.
Yeah, that's all.
Yeah. So it's I'd always say try to move to Linux containers. But I also do understand lots of companies have invested 10, 20, maybe 30 years building their solution. It might just very well be, and I think most of the time it is, a multi-year plan to actually move forward. And if you're going to invest that much time, you really need to figure out the pros and cons of the platform before you make that choice, because it's
You've got to have that
quite the
long-term
investment.
vision for this stuff. And I know we're talking Linux containers now. I'm going to be quiet in a second, but once you're into the world of Linux containers, you're into the world of, well, do I just use a vanilla Ubuntu image, or do I try and use one of the really, really small images from Red Hat or Chain Guard or Ubuntu? I've forgotten the name of it. But anyway, the really, really, really tiny distroless, I think they call it, images. But that's an entire other episode. So,
all right. Well, we can probably talk about this for another hour, but we're not. I think, Kubevirt, check it out. Even if you just want to play with it, it was kind of fun running VMs on Kubernetes. So, all right. And with that, we're out. I see that Richard is sitting on a very big boat, enjoying hopefully a nice drink and some sun.
right.
We're happy to have you back next week, mate. Other than that,
enjoy that. Thanks for the demo, mate. Good to be on the show again. See you all next week. Thanks for joining.
See you all next week. Thank you for watching, and bye-bye.